How's it going, everybody, and welcome back. We are going to be talking about installing some drywall today, all the way to the joint compound and to the paint to get our final product until we have to lay down the flooring and the trim or the molding. So a couple things you need to get. Make sure you have is a tape measure, a drywall knife, some pencils, and a utility knife, the bits for drywall, some drywall screws. Make sure you have your drywall square and some extra foam, insulation foam, just in case you find some cracks or something like that. You want to make sure that you fill those in. On top of that, don't forget that you need the drywall. I'm using half-inch drywall here. You're also going to need some drills, whether it be the regular drill or the impact. I chose the impact, but that's just my preference. Now there's two ways to lay down drywall. It's either vertical or horizontal. In a structure this size, I don't mind going vertical. Your main goal is to make sure that the height of the actual drywall is where it needs to be, and the side joints of the drywall where one meets the other is right in the middle of a stud. And that way the next piece of drywall is going to be able to screw onto that same stud that your first drywall ended on. You need to have something that both pieces of drywall can screw on the ends. That's why we made some fillers in the shed initially when we were doing some framing. So luckily for me, on my rafters, underneath every rafter is where a stud is at. So having known that, I was able to make a marking underneath all my rafters, right in the middle, and I know that a stud is going to be right down the center of that. So I know on this piece of drywall, I need to make at least two cuts. One for the height because of the fact that it's too tall and it meets right where my rafter's at, and I need to make it flush with that top plate, otherwise it can be bowing out. The other portion is I need to cut it on the right side to where it's going to meet with the stud. Now the drywall square right here is going to give you that line, the straight line, when you mark it from the bottom of that rafter like I did and make a straight line down. However, keep in mind that the drywall squares are only 4 feet long. So when you're doing the vertical cuts, you need to make sure that you are using the square on the top and then moving it down to the bottom and marking your line from the bottom up and making sure that your line is still straight. And here we have our line drawn on our drywall. You can see it straight up and down. Now, when cutting the drywall, all you need is the utility knife. So what you're going to do is you're going to score the line that you just made all the way down. Sometimes your utility knife does take a couple jumps in the middle of you cutting. So for whatever reason you take a little jump or whatever, just go back, make sure that you're going back up the line and then back down the line again. And all you're going to do is score that piece. And once you have it scored all the way down, sometimes you need to adjust your utility knife and go from the bottom up too. So once you have it scored, all you're going to do is you're going to go to the back side of the drywall, and you can either use your knee or your hand. Now, in this case, I'm going to be using my hand just based on the fact that it's such a thin little piece that my knee probably won't have a good hit on it. But if it was a bigger cut, say in the middle of the drywall, I will be using my knee to bust that drywall. And when you score this, right where you hit it, it should make a line and it should crease the back side of that drywall right where you scored it. So if you did it right, that should happen. And you're going to be making quite a few cuts on drywall. So just keep in mind you're going to need a nice blade on there, a brand new one. If you have an old, dull blade on there, it's not going to give the quite as good of cuts as you would if you had a brand new one on there. So like I said before, all you're going to do is go to the back side of the drywall now, and you're going to give it a good hit. Once you hit it, it should crease backwards, just like it does right here. Once you have that crease, go ahead and take your utility knife and run it down that crease, and now you can cut the paper and that piece should come off. And I may refer to drywall within the video as sheetrock, so just keep that in mind. If I say sheetrock, I mean drywall. Now, for whatever reason, sometimes drywall does not cut perfectly straight, and it leaves these chunks on the end. So all you need, though, is a drywall file. And you need to make sure you have one of these, especially when doing this job. It just smooths out all the edges. And as explained before, I also need to go with a height. So that was the side from stud to stud. Now I need to go with the height of this actual drywall because of the fact that, if you remember me saying, it hits the bottom of that rafter, so it's not flushed against the actual studs. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm making a measurement. I'm taking that measurement and I'm transferring it over to the piece of drywall. And I believe, if I remember correctly, this was about 2 inches I needed to take off of the drywall. In any case, though, just make sure that you're measuring the size or the height of your actual structure you're building. In some cases, cutting drywall is easy in place to where it's at. In other times, it's easier to do it outside or where you have a little bit more room. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. So as I said before, all I'm doing is marking the height. So if I'm taking off 2 inches, I want to make sure I'm marking 2 inches on the bottom side of the actual drywall and the top side, so that I know I can run a straight line. Now, the drywall square should make that line for you, but just in case and you want to be completely accurate, make sure that those 2 markings are actually touching each other when that drywall square lands on top of that drywall. And again, it's the same exact process. All you're doing is using a utility knife, you're scoring the drywall, and you're going to pop this off. Now, the only difference with this is it's such a small little piece that all I'm going to do, I don't care about the crumbling on the end or the little bumps that it's going to leave. I just want to get this piece off, and I'll file it down, and I'll make it nice and smooth. And as you can see here, what a difference just a file can make. And it's so easy to use on this drywall. And it smooths the ends out, whatever you cut or whatever you need to fix for a certain distance or thickness. If something needs to be trimmed just a bit, instead of using a utility knife, just use your file. It works great. Alright, so testing out the cut piece, I need to make sure that everything fits. I need to make sure that it fits from the bottom up and from side to side, and I need to make sure that the ending of my drywall is in the middle of my rafter. Now, don't get confused in what you're seeing right here. You're seeing extra blocking that I put against that insulation there. So there's a stud underneath that blocking because in the future I'm going to build a bed up on top for the boys. But keep in mind that I am actually working on the stud that's just left of that stud that's underneath the blocking, and that's right in the middle of that stud. But there's still one more cut I need to make on this piece of drywall, and that's the outlet that's behind there. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Now, there are different tools and techniques that people use for this. Some people buy a magnetic piece that connects to your outlet box, and when you put your drywall up, it's supposed to connect with another piece of magnet that you can actually just cut around that, and that works. Some people even put lipstick around the box and put their drywall against that, hit their drywall against the box, and the lipstick mark leaves a spot for you to be able to cut out. That works too. However, I didn't have any lipstick around and I don't want to buy any magnetic pieces just for a couple outlets. So the easiest way to do this is just to make a measurement. You're going to measure from the bottom to the very top of that outlet box. And then you're going to measure from the left side to the corner of that outlet box, exactly with the same exact corner you just measured right now. And once you have that measurement down, go put that onto your drywall. If you need to do one measurement at a time, do one measurement at a time. I'm able to do 2 at a time, retain those numbers, and that way I don't have to keep double checking. You still have to make one more measurement, and that's it. I know there's 4 corners to the box, but 3 is all you need, and I'm going to show you why. So make sure that you get that measurement from the top to the bottom, or the bottom of the top to the corner, and the left to the right to the corner. Then you're going to make a measurement from the left to the left corner of that outlet box. Once you have that measurement, go transfer that over to your drywall. Go ahead and make your marking on the measurement you just made from the left side to the left portion of that box, the left top corner. And then what you're going to do is you're going to grab a spare outlet box, the same exact one that you used to install. The only reason I'm saying the same one is because it's going to be identical in the measurement. So if you have a spare one, I highly recommend, if you didn't have one during the construction time, to purchase one because you're going to be using this box. All you have to do is measure or line up the corners of that box to the markings you made and the bottom right hand corner to the box, all at the same time. And if you line all those up, that 4th corner, the bottom left hand corner, you will never have to measure because everything's going to match right up. And then if there's any little lines or anything that you missed with the pencil mark, just fill them in. And as you can see, there's our marking. All you're going to do after that is take your drywall knife, pop a hole, just use your hand, and it should go right into the drywall. Just make sure you're not hitting anything behind the drywall where you're cutting. Once you have that pop, just follow the lines. Every single turn you make, you're going to have to make sure that you pop that drywall screw into it with your hand. I like to go a little bit less than the line, and the only reason is because I like to take a file to it. And when I do a file, it's going to smooth it out, but yet it's still going to cut some drywall down. So I can use my knife here. I mean, if you're really good at cutting drywall and you have a good, steady hand, then by all means, cut your drywall right on the lines. But for me personally, I know I'm going to go ahead and trim as much as I can with the drywall knife, but I'm going to go in with a file and I'm going to start smoothing it out. Now keep in mind, remember, that filing drywall is also making it smaller or cutting off some drywall. So you got to be very careful with that. Now this box is okay because there's going to be a cover covering over it anyways, but try to make it close to being, right around the outlet box itself. And for the moment of truth, the actual cut fits right over that outlet box. Didn't need a magnet, didn't need any lipstick. All you needed was your old school pencil and measuring tape. That's it. Fits great. And here's a close-up view so that you can see that it cut right around the outlet box. Now, again, keep in mind, if you cut just a little bit more than what you wanted, just remember that that outlet cover is pretty wide, okay? So you're going to be able to cover over any mistakes that are made. One thing that I do want to make mention of as well, I forgot to cover in the beginning, was we have our rafters showing where our studs are at, but yet when you start screwing the drywall in, you want to make sure that you have a straight line running from the rafter to down that stud. So make a marking on the floor with either some sort of marker or crayon or pencil. We have a pencil right now, so that's what we're using. Just make a marking right in the middle of the stud on the floor so you have a way to make a line straight up. So once you have all your markings laid out, go ahead and put your drywall up. All you're going to need right now just to hold it up, well, in my case, it was only one screw. So if you need 2 screws, you need to hit a screw on each stud just to make sure that you're holding it up. Then that's what you're going to need to do. But for the vertical ones right here that I'm putting in, 1 screw is enough for me to get the remainder ready. So here are the different types of bits you can use. So here's a regular bit on my left side, and here's a drywall bit. Now you can see what a drywall bit does. It does sink it into the drywall, and that's the main cause of it. A regular screw bit is going to give you the nail head or the screw head right at the end of the surface of the drywall. Well, what you want is that drywall screw to be sunk in, because when you put the joint compound on, you don't want any screws shown. So that's exactly what this bit does here. When you put it on this, it's going to sink it, and it's going to give a little sinker portion around the screw head, and it's going to sink it in a little bit further into the drywall. So you could do that with a regular bit, but it's going to take a little bit more pressure. So as you can see here, the bit itself, it stops at the drywall, but yet gives a little bit more to make an indentation. That's exactly what you want. Alright, and as you can see here, I put my first piece on. I already went ahead and screwed in the ends, right on the end stud and the middle. So there's no specific distance between each screw. I probably went between, 6 to 8 inches, maybe even a little bit more in the middle portion and on the edges. Just keep in mind, just put enough screws there that are going to hold it. You don't want to go in a massive amount because that's going to be a lot of joint compound work to have to fill in. Just make sure that you put enough that's going to hold it up, but yet make sure you put enough that's not going to fall down. Alright, so as you know now how to actually put a piece of drywall up, I went ahead and cut my second piece. Did the exact same thing. I made the measurement, I marked my drywall, used the square, made a line, used my utility knife, made it, scored it, and I busted it out, made the line. So what I like to do here is the cut portions are going to go towards the end of the actual structure. My smoothest portion, which is going to be the portion that I did not cut, is going to be my seam. So as you can see, it's pretty easy. I went ahead and put all the screws in. Cutting drywall, laying drywall, installing it, all that. It's very simple. It just takes some time, some patience, and that's it. Just make sure you remember that it's going to create a lot of dust, a lot of debris. So be careful and be smart about where you're actually doing the cuts at. If you're doing this in the kitchen, right on the sink area, your wife's going to be pretty mad that you're doing that. Alright, now getting started on the next wall. This is the back side. Pick a stud, any stud. As long as it's one that's close by and it's not going to be an additional reach to where you have to put another stud in. So I went ahead and put my piece of drywall basically right to the second stud that was in the middle where I had to put my filler. Keep in mind, these little silver tabs here on the outlets, they need to be broken off. Little Mickey Mouse ears. Just take a pair of pliers and rip them off. Alright, and as shown before, you're going to get your measurements for the outlet box and you're going to transfer them over onto the drywall. It's pretty simple. Just get your 3 measurements, get the box that you had either left over that you had to purchase for this portion of the job, make your marking, line them all up onto the markings, and trace around that box to get a perfect outlet box to cut out. It's pretty simple. After you have that traced out, get your drywall knife and start making the cut. Get your file to make sure everything's smooth. Alright, so we have 3 walls down now. We have the right side, the back side, and the left side. I don't think you can see the left side right now because I have this insulation covering it. However, it is all done. Now we need to concentrate on the portion where the door and the window's at, that wall. We have a couple cuts to make here. So the general rule is that you do not want to cut your drywall on the corner portions of either a window or a door. You want to make sure that those seams are somewhere else, either above or on the side of it. Alright, so let's pay attention to what we have here. We have a window very close to this door, and we have a door within a close vicinity of both sides of the wall. So lucky for us, we have 2 pieces of drywall that we're going to be able to use. Nothing else. So what we're going to do is we're going to use 1 piece of drywall on the right side, and we're going to make the seam right in the middle portion, right here. And that's where our seam is going to meet with the other piece of drywall on the left side. We just do not want to make our seams on the corners of the doors or the windows, or the door or the window. So we don't have 2 doors, we only have 1 door. So we want to make sure that the seam is in the middle and not on the edges. So just keep that in mind. You don't want a piece going straight up from where the window's at, straight up to the top plate, just based on the fact that that seam will be in the corner of that door. You don't want that. So the very first thing that I did in this situation is I made my seam first. I made my measurement from the right side of the wall to the middle portion of that door where I want to cut my drywall. That was the very first measurement that I made so that I knew what I was working off of. Your next measurement should be measuring from the side of the wall to your door frame. And as you can see here, I have my measurement. Everybody's measurement is going to be different. And just keep in mind that you want to make sure you measure the top and the bottom of the door. When you place a door in, it doesn't always go in straight, so you need to use shims. And when you use shims, that's what levels out the door. So you're going to have some different measurements from the top of the door to the bottom. So you want to just make sure that you make those measurements onto your drywall. Then go ahead and make your measurement for your window and your switch. So as you can see here, the drywall square that I'm using, I'm not lining it straight up with the edges of the drywall. The reason being is because some of the measurements are a little bit different. Even if it's 1/16 of a difference, I want to make sure that I'm going from measurement to measurement. It's kind of like connecting the dots. However, there are some parts that you can use your drywall square, but for the majority of the parts when it comes to these kind of cuts, I want to make sure that I'm using my drywall square for the straight edge portion, but not for the actual flush portion against the drywall. That is what's going to make your connect the dots meet. If you used a flat surface on the drywall and you use the flat portion of the drywall square and you try to make a straight line from a dot, it doesn't always connect to the other dot that you made or the other measurement, just based on the fact that some things are different, whether either be a quarter of an inch or a 1/16 of an inch. You want to make sure you're right on those markings. So as you can see here, I have all my measurements down and all the lines connected. I have my measurements written on my drywall as well, and some differ. They shouldn't differ by too much, but I mean, give or take quarter of an inch sometimes. Either the studs could be a little bowed or you could have made a bad cut. Whatever the case is, it doesn't matter. As long as you make the measurements, put them on the drywall, and you make the cut, it's going to all flow in pretty easily. You just don't want a lopsided window, so you make sure that when you actually do the framing that everything is as close to straight as possible. And the same thing is going to apply to the switch as you did the outlets. All you're going to do is make your measurement. You could take a measurement from the corners and from the bottom to the top, make your 3 markings, use your spare electrical box outlet that you have here. They're all the same ones I used. They're all new construction outlet boxes that I used, and they just hammer right in or screw into a stud. So it's going to be the same exact idea as if you were cutting a portion out of the drywall for the outlet. Now, as explained before, I'm working on the door right now. Not everything is going to be perfect from 25 inches from one side to the top corner of the door, 25 inches from the middle, to the middle portion of the door. It's not going to all jive exactly the same measurement. So what I'm doing here is I'm just using the side of a flat piece of sheetrock here, or drywall, and I'm making my marking from connecting the dots. It shouldn't be that much off, but it is going to be somewhat off. It should be somewhat off by the shims that adjust the door to make the door level. So you're going to have different measurements from the side of the drywall to where the door starts. That is why I'm making my marking here without my square. I'm using a piece of drywall here that I can maneuver left or right, and the drywall square is not going to stop me from doing that. All my measurements are now on this piece of drywall. The window, the outlet, and where the door frame meets. So, if done right, I make all my cuts, file everything down, make everything nice and smooth. This thing should fit right over this wall. So one thing I learned with doing this, and it's not necessarily a must, but it helps a lot. Use a screwdriver, flathead or a Phillips, doesn't really matter, and tap in all the corners. That way you don't have to hit that in with your, as I did right here, you don't have to hit it that much in with your drywall knife. It's going to go in, you're going to have to give it a little bit of a hit, but at least you have something to start at. So all you have to do from that point on is make all your cuts. Get all your cuts cut out, all the measurements that you made, and just use a file it down to make it nice and smooth, and that should fit right on. And here you have that piece cut out, you have the window cut out, and the light switch. Now it's time to get started on the left side. So this piece is pretty easy here. All you have to do is make your measurement from the side of the wall, the corner portion, to where your seam is at from your last piece of drywall you just installed. So basically the piece that we had our window cut out and our light switch cut out, that is the piece you want to meet with. So that is the measurement from the corner of the wall to that seam that's on top of the door. So it doesn't matter if you go in the middle of the door or a little bit left of the door, a little bit right, as long as it's above the door. So once you have that measurement cut out, then you can make your measurement around your door frame. Then you can cut that portion out. So as you can see, I made the long measurement here that's going to meet the middle of the seam. Now, as I said before, you can use your hand or your knee. Right here, I'm just busting it with my knee, and you're going to see a seam that comes out right there from the back side. Now with that back side, all I have to do is run my utility knife up that seam, and it's going to cut the paper off. Then you're going to make your measurement around the door, and then you can install that in. It's pretty simple. Like I said, it's not that hard. When I was moving this around, I did sustain a little crack in the drywall above the door. But again, that's nothing that's going to make me want to throw this drywall out. If you come across a small little crack that's not crumbling your drywall, you'll be perfectly fine to fill that in with joint compound. So if you watched my installing the electrical portion on this building, then you'll remember that there's screws on these outlet boxes here that could be adjusted for whatever thickness of drywall you installed. All you want to make sure is that you're turning that screw to make that blue box portion flushed with that drywall. You're going to do the same exact thing with the outlets and the light switches. Just adjust the boxes. It doesn't need to be done now. It could be done later on, but you might as well get them done and make them look nice while you still have that chance right now, or the ability to do so. So again, you can see everything's pretty flushed up, and that's how you want it. Now, measuring around the window is very simple and a lot easier because you're going to be using smaller pieces. A lot of small cuts here. Just make sure that whatever you're doing, you're making the measurements from corner to corner, and that way, just in case for whatever reason you have a little offset of something in there. So this is the window piece that I took out initially. I know that this is the same length, and I'm going to be able to use this at least on 2 pieces. Can't use them on 4 because you're going to make some cuts. And as you can see here, I cut it, made the measurement, cut it, and I used the file and made a smooth edge. So don't worry too much about the corner areas. They're going to be covered up by another piece of drywall, and it's going to be smoothed out, and it's going to have joint compound on there, and it's going to be painted, and it's going to have some wood trim, you know, in the long run. So don't worry too much if it's not perfect. All you want to do is make sure that it's the right size and that it fits on there. And please don't forget to file your drywall. This is a must because of the fact that you don't want any clumps or anything that's going to throw anything offset. You want to make sure that you have all these filed down nice and smooth. Don't hit these too hard if you made the measurement right on. You just want to make it smooth. All you have to do is once you have your pieces cut, just go ahead and install them. Make sure that you're installing on the right side. Make sure that you have the right cut to the right portion of the actual window. So you can put one screw in the middle. It's going to hold it a lot easier than me putting it on the edge. The one thing I'm having an issue with these bits right here is that they're not magnetic. I'm used to magnetic bits and they hold on pretty well. Once I started using this, noticing that it wasn't magnetic, I had to make sure that I was holding the screw at the time. If you can find a magnetic bit drywall, as you can see here, I'm having a little bit of difficulty going up, but try to find a drywall bit that actually is magnetic. It helps so much more. A small little trick that you can use is once you have the bottom and your top installed, just mark the corners or the edges of the top and the bottom pieces. Once you have those marked, make a straight edge line right down, connect the dots, and you should have a perfect cut, and you won't have to make any additional measurements with a measuring tape. So as you can see here, the window is done. I have the pieces in. I didn't go with an enormous amount of screws on this, maybe 3 or 4 at the most, just enough to hold it in. It's not going to go anywhere. I don't anticipate anybody standing on this windowsill. Okay, so if you watched my videos on framing this structure, we did not include this portion in there because we were going to do it towards this portion of the project. What we need to do is build an additional rafter of some sort. It's not going to be supporting the roof or anything like that, but it's going to give you the extra space to be able to hook up your drywall. So the way that we did this is the rafter, the 2x6 portion, is not going to be flushed up against the rafter from the outside. So, or the outer portion, the last rafter. So what we needed to do is we needed to put some 1x's between those two 2x6s to make it perfectly flushed with the portion that's holding up your actual ridge board. So what we did here is we drilled some pilot holes. After you put your 1x's in, drill some pilot holes and make a screw, put a screw right into that pilot hole that you made into that 1x. Then what you're going to do is you're going to build some small little drywall studs. Now you can use 2x6s, you can use 2x4s, it doesn't matter. We had spare 2x6s, so that's what we used to make the actual drywall studs on the bottom. And you're going to see exactly what we have after this portion. So as you can see here, we have the 2x6s with the same angle cut as the rafters, and then you have the same angle cut with the actual drywall studs on the bottom. Again, we used 2x6s because that's what we had left over. So the drywall now has the ability to go up flushed, but we're not going all the way up to that 2x6. We're going to use a 2x4 with the same cut as the rafters, going from the ridge board portion down to the right corner. Just like this, because what you want here is you want the ability to have a position for that drywall, the end of the drywall now, to hook into that actual 2x6. I'm sorry, the 2x4. So you're going to have your drywall going up those 2x6 little studs that we built, and you're going to have the roof portion or the ceiling portion of the drywall from that 2x4 to the 2x6. Just make sure everything's level. And this is how you make those 2x4 cuts right there. All you're going to do is get the same angle cut that you had for the rafters, whatever degree it was that you built. Make your cut that's going to go against the actual ridge board itself. From that point on, you're going to make your measurement from the ridge board to the corner or where your top plate's at. That is what's going to give you the length of that 2x4 for your length of your drywall that's going to go up on the ceiling. That should be 90-degree cut. Now you don't have to use the worm drive that I'm using here. You can use a skill saw or a circular saw, or you can use a miter saw. The only thing is I didn't have too many cuts to make, so I didn't want to have to go ahead and take my whole miter saw out. It would be easier, but circular saw or a worm drive does the same exact job. And now you can see that we have the ability to go up with that drywall against those drywall studs we made, and now on to the ceiling portion from left to right or from right to left, however you want to do it. Now when cutting the foam for the insulation for the ceiling portion, if you cut it tight enough, it's going to fit in. However, I wanted to add some additional reinforcement just to verify and make sure that it's going to stay in. So I cut little pieces of 1x, just make sure that they don't, overlap the rafter, the bottom portion of the rafter that's going to get in the way of the drywall. I just screwed them in and made sure that these pieces of foam boards are going to last up there. Also, there's some seams that are in the middle of the actual foam board. So I had to make sure that I put some tape on there for additional reinforcement. So just keep that in mind. It's not needed, but it helps. Alright, so time to get started on the triangular portions, the ones that are going to the peak of the roof. Just keep in mind, I could have easily gone with some ceiling joists, ran them straight across on top of the top plates, and made a flat surface for the ceiling. The only reason I went with this peak, and I'm going to continue with the drywall on this portion, is just because of the fact that I want more room for the boys for the height. That way they could put a bed up there and it wouldn't be smashing their head when they, just the height of the ceiling being flat. So that's the reason I made it this way. Couple little measurements you need to make. You need to make the measurement from the top plate to the height of the actual triangular portion, basically underneath that first rafter, all the way to the right side, the corner side, and you want to make that height as well. And just connect the dots and you should have your cut. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. So 3 measurements, that's all you need. You need from the top plate to the top portion of your triangular portion. You need from the top plate, from that portion that you just started with that measurement, all the way to the right side to the point of that triangular portion. And then you need the height from that triangular portion up to the bottom of the rafter. Make those measurements, make the cut, and you should have a solid piece. And that's exactly what I have here. I have my measurement from the top plate to the bottom side of my rafter, basically the top peak of that triangle, all the way down to the right side to the bottom portion to the point of the triangle. Once you have it cut out, it should look something like this. Now don't forget that you have that ridge board right there that you need to cut around. So all you have to do is line up the piece as if you were going to put it up straight. Go underneath that ridge board. Make your markings on the side of the ridge board where the drywall's at, just like this. Then maneuver your drywall piece as if it was going to be the correct height. Move it to the right of that ridge board, and then get your marking from that point also. The bottom portion of that ridge board should be on the bottom portion of that drywall marking that you're making right there. Make a perfect square, cut it out, and it should fit right over that ridge board. I found that when doing this small cut, it helps a lot just to use your drywall knife. Don't forget to use your speed square. Your speed square is going to give you a perfect straight line. So when you want to make these little small cuts, just make sure that you're using that as some sort of level, that way, or a straight edge. That way you have a good solid line to run off of. Just use your drywall knife, make that small cut, and again, don't forget to file it. It's not needed, but it makes it look good. So Just file it off, make it nice and smooth, and it's going to fit on. Especially if you have a little clumps in there, you want to make sure that those clumps don't get in the way of, you know, offsetting your piece of drywall that you're throwing up there. You just want to make sure that you actually file it down smooth. That way you don't run into any issues. And then you're going to continue that process for the remainder 3 portions. You can do this off of one sheet if you wanted to. Instead of making them into 4 pieces, you can make actually 2 pieces, one for each side. It just makes it a lot easier working if you make them into little segments. Again, just go ahead and make your cuts, put them up there with the drywall screws. Make sure you're hitting your wood, and those things are going to stay up there. As long as you screw them in and force them, they're not going to go down anywhere. Alright, so for the ceiling portion, all it required for me was 2 pieces of drywall. Now, typically I would be running an entire sheet from one side to the other, make the measurement, make the cut, put it up there with some drywall screws, and put it in and it'll be done. I don't have that extra hand to help me hold these up above my head, and if you work with these over your head, it gets pretty tiring, so I'm going to cut them into pieces. So the same thing applies as if you're going against the studs. You want to make sure that you're measuring to the middle of a rafter. So you want to make sure that you get up on your ladder, you measure from one side of the wall to the middle of a rafter, wherever you want to cut. I'm not just going to cut the pieces into wherever I want. I want to make sure I'm still measuring and cutting them where they need to be cut at. And I have one portion down. This should be from the side wall to the middle of the rafter. And the next thing that you want to do is measure from the bottom portion of that rafter where it ties into the top plate to the peak of that rafter where it actually hits the ridge board. So the bottom portion of that rafter actually. Those are the measurements you want to make. Make that measurement with your measuring tape, transfer that number to the drywall, and then cut a perfect straight line after you make the marking. Just use the utility knife, make the cut, and it should fit in. So like I said before, working above your head is always hard. It doesn't matter what you're doing, even if it's electrical. Anything above your head is always going to be tiring. So try to get this thing up as soon as possible and screw it in. My recommendation, which I did not do on this one, I should have done, is at least draw some sort of arrow to what hits the ridge board. You can see that there's a gap between the ridge board and the drywall. That's only because I put it in the wrong way. It obviously was not going in the right way. I should have put a little arrow on it, and once I flipped it around, I realized, okay, I put it in the wrong way, and now it fits. So you can see that it's flushed against the ridge board, it's flushed against the back side of the wall, and it's going to meet the middle of that rafter. That is your main goal. That's what you want. If you have a couple seams here or there, don't worry about that. Let the drywall breathe some, but at the same time, you don't want too big of a gap. Your drywall tape or whatever you're using some sort of mesh tape, it's all going to fill that in, especially with the joint compound. You just don't want like an inch gap, but any small little gap between is perfectly fine. So just screw in the screws, the drywall screws into the sheetrock. Make sure you're hitting the rafters. Once you have a couple screws in, you can let go, and it's going to be a lot easier working with 2 hands. So once you have a couple pieces up, don't forget that you have an outlet box that needs to be cut out. Same exact process as if you were doing it against the studs. Just make your marking, make your measurements, and cut it out. Alright, so I'm going to be working on the ridge board portion. You can still see that there's wood exposed. I'll show you how I'm going to do that in a bit. In the meantime, with me working on that, my dad's going to be working on the corner bead. That portion is a metal strip that's going to go around the window. And you need to make sure that you enforce that window corner so that when anybody leans on it or whatever, it doesn't break the drywall. So this is the corner bead that we're going to be using. You can either screw this in or you can nail it in. We found it a lot easier to nail it in just so the screw heads are not popping out of the actual corner bead. You want to make sure that they're kind of with the surface of the corner bead or at least underneath it. All I'm doing here is I cut a piece of drywall. It's going to be the length of the actual ridge board. However, I made a 4-inch thick piece. And the reason I want to do that is because I'm going to cut it right down the middle at 2 inches. So I'm just going ahead and I cut this piece at 4 inches. I'm breaking off the edge, and I'm going to use a file to smooth out the edge. Now once I cut this down at 2 inches, what it's going to do is it's going to create some sort of V shape. And that V shape is what's going to cover over that ridge board. Again, make it some sort of design. You don't want to rip the backside of the actual drywall itself. You don't want to make it into pieces. You just want to cut it and bend it. And it's going to be one solid piece with just a cut down the middle. So again, here is your marking at 2 inches, and go ahead and use your utility knife and cut that. As you can see here, I'm going slowly with my hand to break the actual seam portion. Again, I am not cutting that paper on the back side. I'm just cutting the drywall as if you were scoring it, which we did, and now we're just softly breaking that. And that's what's going to create the V. And this should fit nicely right around the ridge board. That seam portion is going to be covered with joint compound. And once you have that put up, just go ahead and screw it into the actual ridge board itself from the sides. Now there's 2 ways to cover the seams. You can use the joint tape, which is this. It's a lot cheaper. And then you have your self-adhesive tape here. We have never used self-adhesive tape, so we're going to try it for the first time on this structure. The self-adhesive is a lot more expensive than the regular tape, but we're going to give this one a shot. So applying the self-adhesive tape, it's going to require no joint compound on the backside. That is the one thing that's good about it. There's a couple downsides to this, and what we saw was that when actually applying the joint compound over it, it's not as easy as applying it against tape. And when applying it against tape, your tape is going to cover over that seam no matter what. When applying the joint compound over this mesh, you got to make sure that it actually goes and hits all the holes, because you don't want anything protruding out, basically, and you don't want any gaps. The other downside to the actual adhesive tape is that it leaves some sort of strings off on the sides that you need to make sure you cut, because otherwise you don't want that running into your joint compound as well. The great thing about it is that it's easy to apply. All you got to do is use your hand, basically, and it sticks right onto that drywall. So again, it's whatever you prefer. In my future projects, I probably won't be using this mesh tape again. But again, it was easy to apply. If it's a small little area that you're going to do, I mean, by all means, go ahead and do that. But for future reference, or for my own sake, I'm probably not going to be using this mesh tape again. And here's the bucket of joint compound that we're going to be using. This thing runs about maybe $13, $14. In all honesty, at the end of the project, all I did was use one full bucket, and that's to include the texturing. So you want to get some joint compound into another bucket. So if you can purchase a bucket on its own, brand new one, or one that you use, just make sure it's cleaned up with no junk in it. So I highly recommend a brand new bucket when doing joint compound. That way you don't run into any debris inside of that bucket getting onto your wall. All you have to do is mix a little bit of water in there, make sure it's nice and smooth, almost like a butter. And once you have that ready to go, it's ready to apply over to your wall. So just keep in mind, you have different size trowels that you need to use. You have 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch, 12-inch, 10-inch. You know, those different types of trowels are used for different areas of the wall. Your main goal in applying joint compound is not to make it bulky. It's just to cover the seams in all of your nail holes or your screw holes. That is your main goal. You want to make it as flat as possible, but yet covering up everything. So sometimes it's going to require 2 coats, 3 coats, whatever the case is. Now, when texturing your walls, that is what's going to cover your drywall where you're not hitting the seams. Remember, this portion of the project, all you're doing is covering the seams, your corner beads, your screw holes, everything about that you're covering. That is your main goal right now. And again, you're trying to make it as flat as possible, but yet still covering all the seams. You don't want to make it clumpy, so sometimes you're going to have to put some pressure on this. If for whatever reason in the long run, you know, hey, I made it a little bit clumpier than, or there's a little bump on my wall here from the joint compound, it dried up on me, what do I do? You know, that's the reason they designed some sand blocks in order to be able to sand that down. But if you're making that mistake, when it gets really hard, it's going to require a lot of sanding. So you want to make sure that you don't make it clumpy. The edges of your joint compound, you want to try to make it as flat against the wall as possible as well. That way, when you actually texture and you paint it, you're not seeing any edges of your actual the joint compound you're applying right now. So that is your main goal. You just want to make it flat, but yet cover everything. And don't forget to hit your screw holes. Had we not used the bit that sinks the screw in, these heads will be popping out of the drywall and you'll be able to totally tell in the joint compound. And hitting your corners, you're going to use a small trowel for this. All you're doing is making sure that you're going to make that corner flushed. Make sure that the joint compound is going into that corner to make that corner look. So again, this was one of the issues we had with this mesh tape, the self-adhesive one. It just did not work as well as if you were applying the paper tape portion to the corner. So I highly recommend using the paper tape as opposed to the self-adhesive, especially when it comes to the corners. It's just too weak and it's too fragile. When you're pushing it in, it just does not stay like joint compound paper. We managed to get the job done with this mesh tape. However, it took a lot longer than it would if you just had the tape, the regular tape behind it. And for the seam portions where the two pieces of drywall meet, again, it's not going to look pretty, but it's going to be thin and covering the seams. That's what's needed. This is the very first coat, so we're still going to have another coat going over this that's going to make it a little bit more flushed. So we just went ahead and just kept on working on all the seams. It shouldn't be anything more than this, just something to cover up all the indentions, all the screw holes, all the seams. If you have any nails sticking out or screws sticking out, I'm sorry, just go ahead and use your drill and push those back in. So this portion does take some time to do it right. Just make sure you're patient and getting all your seams covered up. That's the main goal, is just to make sure that you're almost flushing it to make it look like one large big piece of drywall that just got stuck into your structure. You want it to make it look solid and in one piece. So just keep working, making sure that everything gets done the right way, and you're going to have yourself a beautiful inside when you're all done. Throw some music on and just go at it. And once you have your first coat down and everything's dried, you're going to use a larger trowel now. This larger trowel is used to actually feather out the joint compound, make sure that it's all flat. You're not going to have any clumps. You're going to be completely smooth with this joint. When you feather it out, it's going to blend in with the remainder of the wall once you're ready to texture and paint. That's your main goal, and that's the reason why my dad here is using a larger trowel. It's just to be able to feather it out and make it look like a long piece. Don't forget to feather out all of your seams. This is what's going to make it look nice and smooth, especially your ceiling. Your ceiling is going to be tough to work with because it's above your head. Like I said before, everything above your head is always harder to work with. But try your best to make sure that you try to make this as smooth as possible. That way you don't see any clumps or bulges or bumps or anything like that on this wall. Once that joint compound gets thrown on or textured and the paint goes on, things stand out. So you want to make sure that you actually do this the right way and you cover up everything the right way. And you can see here he's using a different size trowel now. Just because of the angle that he's at, he doesn't want to use the bigger one just based on the fact that he's going to cover too much on the bottom. Remember, all you're doing is feathering the seam area. You don't want to keep going on to the drywall where you don't need to put joint compound. You can see how smooth it's coming out. That's your main goal. You're just making everything else look a little bit better now. All the seams, the first coating that you put on, you're just going to make the second coating, you're going to make it look a little bit better. Alright, all of our seams now are covered. You're going to let this thing dry now until you start sanding. Even though that's our next step, is sanding this down, you want to make sure that it's completely dry before you even touch it again. You can see that there's some dark spots in the joint compound. Those dark spots are what are the wet spots on the drywall. You want to make sure that those are completely white before you even touch this again. So obviously some portions have dried up already. It's still not completely 100% dry to be able to sand yet. But once you start seeing those dark spots fading out to white, that's when you know that it's starting to dry up. So all the seams are done. We're going to let this sit for about a day, and then we'll come back on it with some drywall sand blocks. It's not going to be too difficult. We made this pretty thin. We shouldn't have too much to sand. Alright, so came back the following day and everything's pretty much white now. I'm not seeing any dark spots, and this thing is ready to be sanded down. So this is what it should look like when it's ready to be sanded. All white, no dark spots whatsoever. Alright, a couple different things you can use to sand this. At the store, they sell these poles that you connect a piece of sandpaper to. It's for drywall, and they also sell these blocks here. I highly recommend getting the angle blocks just based on the fact that it really smooths out the corners of your wall or where your window's at. You can see the angle on them. It really helps out instead of getting a square block. So this is one way to sand the drywall. You're just using the pole, some sandpaper, and just hitting all the joint compound. You're not just hitting the edges, you're hitting all of it. You want to make sure that the edges of your joint compound, though, where it got feathered out, is completely smooth against that wall. But you also want to make sure that you're not having any bulges where your seams are at, or where any of the joint compound is really. So that's your main goal, is just to kind of flush it up right to where that drywall's at. Now, this is one way to sand your drywall. The pole works great, but it just does not do as good as going hands-on with the block. I much rather prefer using a block like the angle one I showed you earlier. I would much rather use that one to actually sand everything down. So I like to use this pole mainly for if there's a little piece of joint compound that had flaked off the trowel and maybe landed on a part of the drywall that you want to make sure you take off completely. I use this basically just to kind of hit off any little pieces of drywall, or I'm sorry, joint compound that flaked off anywhere. I'm not really using it to smooth anything out as much as it should be used for. I will be using that block mainly to hit this joint compound and making sure that it's completely flat. So again, this pole could be used for whatever you want to use it for, but my preference, in my experience, is that it's good for just hitting off those little crumbles that came off the trowel. So here's the block that I'm using. You can see that it works so much better. You can just see that joint compound dust coming off. Just keep in mind, you are going to get extremely dirty with this, and anything that you're working over, or the flooring portion, it's going to collect some dust. So if you're working on new drywall, maybe not on a new construction, but maybe in a room somewhere, you're going to want to place some sort of paper down in order to collect all this dust onto the paper. Just roll it up and throw it away. But if you're working on a new construction like this is, sweeping it up is not going to be a big deal. We're going to end up laying some wood flooring on this thing anyways. So as you can see here, a lot of dust is coming off. Just keep hitting it down and making sure that it's nice and smooth. Almost, I mean, you want to make it look like a piece of drywall is placed up there. And just a close-up view, you can see that there's some indentions on this joint compound here. The drywall sand block right here is going to take care of all of that. I'm not even applying too much pressure to it and it's smoothing it out. So just having done that, I know that this block's going to work all around the walls. And just a quick reminder, don't forget about your corners too. This block right here, like I said, the angle one works wonderful with the corners. It hits the edges, it hits the side that you're actually sanding, and it hits the corner edge as well. So I highly recommend in purchasing this block or this type of block if doing this project. And don't forget to use the sand block on all your seams too. It's very easy to use with this. It just takes all of the actual thickness of the joint compound and files it down. So just imagine you're using a file on this. You want to get it as smooth as possible. Run your hand over it a couple times, just making sure that everything is nice and smooth. Okay, so here I have everything sanded down. You can see on the floor everything is just white now. It looks like snow. Basically, it's going to cause this much debris from sanding. So just keep that in mind. Like I said before, if you're going to do this in an area where there's already, your floor done, you're just adding a new wall into your house or something like that, you're going to want to make sure that you are putting something down on the floor just in case. You can see how smooth all this comes out. There's no rough edges, there's no indentions. The sandpaper, you got to make sure that you do that. If you want to do just a crummy job, throw your joint compound on, texture it, and then paint it, that's all up to you. But if you want it done right, you want to make sure that you actually use the sand block, sandpaper, something. Just make sure, look around, make sure you get all your edges. Just make sure you sand it. It makes it look so much better in the end. Alright, now preparing to texture the structure, all the walls. Basically what you want to do is you need to cover up your windows, your doors, all your light switches, your outlets. Everything needs to be covered up. So there's different material to use. You can even use newspaper if you want, but they sell this roll of paper, the brown paper here, at any local hardware store. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that you get some masking tape or some painter's tape at least, as well as the paper. And you want to make sure that with that masking tape, what you're doing is you are making a perfect square around a window, or you're covering your outlet, you're covering your light switch. You want to make sure that everything is covered up. If you see any little indentions or little areas that are sticking out like this, you want to make sure that they're flushed up, because not only is this going to be used for texturing, but I'm going to leave this on when it's ready to get painted as well. So this is what's going to make sure that no paint or texture gets on any item that you want to be covered up, or you don't want to have the color change. Let's say a light switch, you don't want to have it a blue light switch when it should be white. So here is a light switch that is covered with masking tape. You can use painter's tape, you can use whatever you want, as long as it sticks on there and you're able to easily remove it when you're done with the painting or the texturing. In my case here, I'm going to leave this all on until I'm completely done with painting. So do the same thing with the outlets as well. Alright, and as for the outlets, like I said, just go ahead and make sure you're putting masking tape or painter's tape over them. You don't want to go too far out with the tape. You just want to make sure you're covering that in the box at least. Even if the box is a little exposed, that's fine. You just want to make sure that the outlet itself is covered. The only one I'm leaving open right here is this last one by the door, and that's just because I'm going to use that outlet. So I'm just going to be very careful when I'm working around that to make sure that nothing gets on it. And another type of material they use to be able to cover up items is this clear plastic piece right here that is used to cover up longer items, so such as a door. So you can expand it out. There's usually a big roll that you use, but I had a small piece here just big enough to cover the door. Again, with this, you just want to make sure that you're not covering too much to where it's going to affect the texture against the wall or the paint. So basically what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to measure it out, and I'm going to either cut it to size, or I'm going to fold it over and make sure that it's just covering the door. Alright, and a couple items that you need in order to texture. You need a compressor. You need the hopper gun that shoots out texture. You need a drill to be able to mix it. You need actually the joint compound itself, and a hose in order to connect your hopper up to it. Or your texture gun. So you want to make sure that when using the joint compound and you're going to shoot it out of a texture gun, you want to make sure that it's pretty wet. You want to make sure that it's going to run right off the edge of whatever you're mixing with. So as you can see here, I'm just using some water, some joint compound, and mixing it together. And in case you were wondering, this is the same exact bucket that I was using when filling in all the seams with a joint compound. This is the same bucket. So you can see that there's about half of it left, maybe just a little less. And I was hoping at the time that it was going to be enough to shoot the texture, and it was. But I did hit bottom of the bucket. So just in case your structure's a little bit bigger than this, or you know, you're just planning about half the bucket to be able to shoot the texture. If anything, just buy another small little can, enough to be able to use. And when done mixing, it should look something like this. It should just fall off whatever mixer you're using. It's dripping right off. This is the consistency that you want in order for the texture to be able to shoot out of that gun properly. This is exactly how you want it. So you want it wetter than when you were putting the joint compound on with a trowel. Alright, and as explained before, I have my plastic wrap covering my door. All I did was run it toward the edge of the door. Make sure that it's closed. Make sure that your door is the last thing that you're actually wrapping, just because of the fact that you have to go in and out. But once you're in a structure like this, you're not going out until this wall is hit. So I would make this your first wall. So this is the texture gun that I have. I've had it for many, many years and it still works great. It has a large hopper on the top, as you can see. They sell so many different type of texture guns and they all work just fine. I have just had this one for a while now. I don't even know if they sell this one anymore, to be honest, but I do use this one. I love it. It works for me. It's never failed on me before, and I mean, really, as long as you clean them at the end, they're gonna keep on lasting for you. So all I'm doing here is just using a cup and pouring this in. If I had another set of hands, they could pour that bucket into the hopper, but I don't have that right now, so I'm just using a cup and I'm putting a good amount into that hopper. Just make sure you shake it up, get all the bubbles out, and get it ready. Once you have that hooked up for the first time, just hook it to your compressor, the hose, turn your compressor on, and ready to go. You could still fill that in with the hose connected to it as well. So one of my biggest recommendations when using this, it's going to require a lot of air coming out of it. So a compressor that doesn't have a lot of PSI, you want to make sure that you're going to have a good solid compressor that's going to be continuously either producing air or one that can hold a lot of air. So either way, you don't want to get a cheap compressor for this type of job. And the only reason I'm saying that is that's from prior experience. What I used one time with this gun was a small compressor, and I shot probably one pull of the trigger once every 30 seconds. It took me forever to do. Thank God the project I was doing was a small little entertainment center that was blended into the wall basically. But if it had been a structure like this and shooting a piece of wall every 30 seconds, I would have had a hard time doing this. I would probably have just thrown my hopper gun on the ground and had gone to the store to buy another compressor. Luckily, within the time period of that happening and to where we are now, I've gotten the chance to get another compressor that produces so much more air. So again, that's my recommendation, is to get a good solid compressor. It's a continuous airflow with these guns, so just keep that in mind. Even when you're not pulling the trigger, the airflow is still coming out. At least that's what's happening with my gun. I'm not sure about any other guns. My only concern with another gun not actually having a continuous airflow is that it's going to start bubbling up the joint compound that's in the hopper, and it's going to start bubbling up and coming right at you, right at your face or out of the hopper itself. So I'm pretty sure that's why the design is a continuous airflow, so that that joint compound does not come out of that hopper. So I know in the previous video, the previous clip, it was hard to see the texture just based on the fact that it's coming out white obviously and it's hard to see, but with a close-up view of this, you can see the joint compound and the texture just flying right onto the drywall. So that's exactly what you want. Now this is coming out clumpy, but I'm going to show you how to use a knockdown knife to make it completely flat with the texture the way it's supposed to be. So you can see how it shoots out and it comes out like splatter. So that's basically what you want. Some close-up views of the wall with the texture on it. I know it's hard to see because of the fact that it's white and it's so thin, but when you get up close to it, you can see the texture against the wall. So I know it doesn't look good right now. I know that it looks, why would you do that to a wall? Well, this is what you need to do to texture it, because once it dries up and that sheen goes away is when you use that knockdown knife in order to make it flat, and it's going to give it the design. So this is done correctly, and all you need is that knockdown knife that I'm going to show you right now. So they sell different sizes of knockdown knives. I just have this small one here. It's going to work. I'm not using it on that big of a structure. So all you want to do is once that sheen, that shine goes away on that joint compound, the texture that you just shot on right now, once that goes away, you're going to use this knockdown knife and it's going to flatten out all the texture that you shot out. That's what you want. You're going to hold it at a 90-degree angle. You are not putting pressure on this. You are simply just gliding it over the texture. So that's exactly how you come up with the texture design. If you left it on there, it's going to leave it all clumpy and it's not going to look that good. So make sure you're using a knockdown knife. Just make sure that you're going over all the wall, including the ceiling, with this knockdown knife. Again, 45-degree angle at the most. You're just gliding it over all the texture. You're going to make it nice and smooth. Just make sure that when doing this, that the joint compound is already gone with that shine. That shine is completely gone. If you did this when the shine was on there, most likely it's going to be too wet, and you're just going to be dragging joint compound around, and it's going to look ugly. So make sure that that shine is gone, but don't wait too long to where the actual texture has dried up completely on you. So it's going to be done the same day, probably within a half an hour of you shooting it. So half an hour to an hour at the most. So keep an eye on it. And when flattened out with the knockdown knife, this is what you're going to get. Notice what it looks like now. It looks like walls usually in a house. And that's what the knockdown knife does. It makes it nice and flat. So we're going to be working on all this area here. I still have some more to go, and I'll be right back when I'm finished. So everything now is knocked down. It's flat. The texture is on. I know it's hard to see because of the fact that it's all blended in. But once you shoot this with the paint, or however you paint, if you paint with a roller or a paintbrush, you're going to see it stand out now, and it's going to look like a solid wall, just like any house. This is what it looks like. This is how you do it. You got to make sure you use that knockdown knife though, and give this about a day to dry before you even decide to paint. Alright, so while the joint compound was drying, me and my son went over to Lowe's and I asked him what color he wanted for the inside of his playhouse. He wanted something close to sky blue, so he came up with this one. It's called K, and it's from Sherwin-Williams from Lowe's. So if you do a lot of painting, I highly recommend using a paint gun, a paint sprayer of some sort. You can always use a paintbrush and a roller, but this job, if you use a paint sprayer, it gets done so much faster. I just bought a gallon worth of paint, and it was able to paint the entire inside of this structure. So this is a Wagner paint sprayer that I have here. It's a great tool to have. It takes a lot of cleaning up to do just to make sure that you don't have any paint still in the hoses or within the system itself. But in all honesty, I'd rather take time cleaning this tool than doing the actual job itself. My only recommendation is to make sure that everything is taped off that you do not want to get paint on. Again, the window, the door, the outlets, the light switch, anything. Make sure it's all taped off. Alright, so this concludes this long video. I know it was long, but we did cover quite a bit from, straight studs to actually going to the paint. So, I'm going to let this whole thing dry for a day at least, and we're going to continue tomorrow with laying the laminate flooring down and all the molding. We're going to go ahead and put some wood flooring down, the trim around the bottom, all the baseboard, the molding that goes around your door, the window, all that trim. So stay tuned. Tomorrow I'm going to go ahead and start working on this, so that video should be up pretty soon. And once we have all that down, that pretty much concludes the interior portion of what needs to be done to this structure, for a playhouse. Eventually, we're going to be making some beds in here. We're going to be attaching the beds to the wall so that the kids have we're going to make a ladder so the kids have the ability to climb the ladder to get to the top of the bed. We're going to have a TV hooked up in here, maybe even an AC unit when the summertime comes, so these kids are going to love it. So I just can't wait to actually be done with the actual structure itself to where they can actually start using it. So like I said, stay tuned. The next video coming up is going to be laying the wood flooring down. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. Don't worry about the installation costs anymore. Once you figure out how to do this with a video, you're going to know that it's going to be so simple to do and never have to worry about painting it again. So thanks for watching.